Good morning, Tom Brown here with the round 10 report for the at the Olympiad in Tromsø for the Wales team. Very encouraging news to report today. 2 wins for both them in the open and the women's section. We'll discuss the women's first. The women were playing Finland and won comfortably in the end with 3.5 with Olivia drawing on 2, I believe, having secured the 3 victories previously. So that's fantastic news. And if we actually look at the, let me just bring this up here. If we look at the table for the women's team in the Olympiad, we see that the ladies have been categorized in Group C. There are 4 groups overall, and there's 28 teams in each group, and there are category prizes for each group. And as we can see, if we look here, Wales are in 7th position of their 28 teams. They are ranked 67th at the start, and the highest team in this group is 56, which is Denmark, so quite a significant jump from 56 to 67th. And in 7th position, they're in a good place to challenge for one of the medals, the gold, silver and bronze, currently held by Malaysia, El Salvador and Egypt, in the final round. Wales have 11 points, which is 5 wins and 1 draw, and these teams, remaining teams here, have either 6 wins or indeed 5 wins and a draw. Here, these teams here are all playing very tough matches above them in the final round, and Wales, who are playing also very tough match against England, no less, a win there should secure a medal here, very likely. So fingers crossed for the ladies on the final round, which is tomorrow, since today is a rest day. So, okay, yes. In the men's section, Wales were pitted against Cameroon yesterday, and it was a relatively straightforward 3-1 victory for us overall. Richard won very quickly in the King's Indian, playing as white. Richard's now switched to D4, and very nice, elegant win. His opponent swapped off the wrong pieces, and Richard very quickly came in for a mating attack. David's opponent played very nice in the opening and probably equalised in a kind of Benko Gambit decline variation. And I was quite impressed with his opponent's play, but a miscalculation enabled David to win a pawn, and then once his pawn was won, Black's position collapsed, and it was quite straightforward in the end. On board 4, unfortunately for David Jameson, he got caught out again in the opening and had quite a bad position, but fought back and gradually got the better of his opponent and looked like he had some good attacking chances. And instead of going for an ending where he would be perhaps slightly better with some winning chances, he decided to go on an attack on the king's side, but his opponent spotted quite a nice sacrificial combination where he sacrificed a bishop to expose David's king, and ultimately that was led to a mating attack. But on board 2, Tim had a very nice, solid win against an opponent that's performing very well in this tournament. The rating of his opponent, let me just get the right window here. Excuse me 1 second. It's not this one. It's not this one either. Here we go. Right. His rating opponent is 1931, but his performance in this tournament is nearer 2100. So one of these underrated opponents that you have to be very wary of. Tim was playing black against John Ebert Agbor, and Tim's opponent started with D4, and Tim opted for a King's Indian type setup. So King's Indian, when you're being checked over King's Bishop, all normal moves. White opts for a very solid line, Bishop F4. The idea being it makes it very difficult for Black to easily play E5, and it's not giving many targets for Black. It's typically for White, or rather any targets for Black to attack later on in the game. Typically, when White is more ambitious with moves like E4, there's opportunities for counterplay on the king's side a little bit more. Okay, so D6, normal moves, E3, Knight B D7, develop, C6, castles, and Queen E8. The idea of Queen E8, which Tim played, is to help support E5 whilst keeping the rook on F8, since F5 may be useful at some point in the future as well. An alternative way to gain some counterplay, which I was just looking at, see how this position has been handled by strong players as Black previously, sometimes knight h5 to try and win the bishop pair. And there's quite a nice line I found, which has occurred a couple of times, but with the help of the computer, where this sort of thing looks quite nice, because after g5, if say bishop g3, then at least knight takes, we can just take the bishop, and at least we can claim we've got the bishop pair, which maybe gives us some long advantages for black. However, after g5, a nice in-between move, if you like, is knight d2, because now if we take the bishop, our knight is on 3, but with help of the computer, actually, there's quite a nice move with knight f4, and say after takes, knight f3, and perhaps attacking the pawn, having to defend the pawn here, and h3, g3, we've got quite an interesting position where perhaps black is slightly to be preferred. Anyway, let's go back to queen e8. So bishop g3, so when e5 comes, not with tempo, rook e1, queen e7, queen develops, and rook e8. Just normal developing moves by white here. h6 probably to stop some knight g5 to e4 maneuvers, and here white opts for c5 with rather committal move. Perhaps better would be something simple, like maybe just pawn takes pawn instead of c5, just to take on e5 takes, and maybe reroute the knight now to e4, and perhaps white is just a little bit better because the pieces of perhaps better development, although black equally should be relatively happy as well. Okay, so after c5, this changes the structure of the position, and the way white handles it, it enables black to well, get to quite a good, reasonable position anyway. So Tim takes, and white decides to take with the bishop on e5, whereas something like knight takes, something like this, and this would be very similar to the game, but it'd be a better version, because at least with these extra pieces on the board, this isolated pawn won't be such a factor. But instead bishop takes, which is, as I say, a bit unusual, allows knight takes. At least we've got the bishop pair. Knight takes, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, bishop f5 attacking the queen, queen b3, bishop sits on e6, bishop c4, swap the bishops off, rook comes to the centre. Okay, so white decides here to double rooks on the e file by moving his rook to the second rank, queen e6, offering a queen exchange, where this isolated pawn, then in an ending, isolated pawns tend to be quite weak. So white correctly refuses that, moving the queen to a4, knight, good blockading square, doubling up the rooks. So Tim needs to be careful with the queen on the e file, so moves it off out of the way of the rooks, and we get this sequence here: knight takes, bishop takes, and queen takes a7. So we are a pawn up, or rather white is a pawn up here. And with careful play, it appears that white can maintain the advantage in this position. Tim plays c5. Obviously this pawn cannot be taken because this knight is on 3, and Tim's opponent reacts with queen a4, hoping to get some tactical threats attacking the rook. However, just taking the pawn on b7 appears to lead to some advantage for white, so perhaps rook takes is pretty much forced. g3 is best to get some space for the king, and then this sequence here, it looks like white is losing material since this rook is on 3, but this nice intermezzo check move, queen b8, king h7, now take with the queen, and the computer, I mean, this is obviously not a forced variation at all here, but the computer likes rook d1 as best for black here, but this position here looks comfortable for white, pawn up, and with some good winning chances with best play. However, after queen a4, which again looks quite attractive, attacking the rook on e8, so rook moves, we get a slightly worse sequence than what we saw in the previous line. Now, so queen comes to a8, king h7, and queen takes b7. So we've got this same sequence, but in a way black has kind of gained a tempo, and then so we get this rook d4. The problem for black is, for white rather, is that there's problems with mating threats on the back rank. So for instance, as a move that looks superficially attractive, maybe queen takes f7. Oh, in fact we can't do that here yet. Well, anyway, I mean queen takes f7, new variation, then queen takes, and the idea being that knight takes, so we're a couple of pawns up now, but of course then rook takes rook, rook here, then rook there, check, which is checkmate of course. So unfortunately we cannot do that. During the game I was wondering if white could get away with something like g4, and the computer says it's playable, and perhaps it is the best move in this position, and it should have been tried by white, because what happened in the game, very quickly white goes downhill from here. So in order to prevent back rank threats, white decides on playing knight f3, because since it protects the rook in the e1 square, so in that final line a rook. So for instance here, this will not be checkmate, simply because the rook can head back there. So okay, so rook e2. So Tim does not, he could check on d1, but another equally attractive move is to play rook b4, attacking the queen. So queen moves to e7, a rook there, and h3, c4, and this position is very difficult for white rather. I mean, this c-pawn is very quick. The knight is very much dominated by the bishop, and indeed white's best here is to sort of play this sort of position, rook takes, bishop takes, and hope with something like knight e1 and maybe queen to here, and use it and try to blockade this pawn on c2. Instead, white loses the thread a bit here and plays knight h4, and probably miscalculating, because this pretty much leads to a forced win of material. So Tim is able to play rook takes rook, so the queen is now under attack, and after queen takes rook, simple chess, check, king h2, c3, queen c4, attacking f7, that c2, well, knight f3, check, queens, and okay, we get this position, and here Tim's opponent resigns. So nice win by Tim there. His opponent played the opening quite well, but lost the thread a bit in the middle game. Okay, in the final round, the ladies have got England, so that's a very exciting game for obvious reasons, and if we were to win that, there'd be a fantastic achievement by the ladies. And we're actually up against Ireland, and if we can win that, we'll end up with a positive score. But Ireland are a very tough side with an average rating of 2400, so they're all at international masters, so we won't be favourites there. Anyway, I'll be back to report on round 11 after the rest day, which will be Thursday. Thank you.